The sun rose lazily over the small town, spilling soft golden light across the roofs and treetops. By the time the market stirred awake, the streets were already humming with weekend excitement. It was the kind of place where laughter blended with the scent of fresh bread, roasted coffee, and warm pies cooling on wooden stands. Children skipped between stalls while vendors called out their specials with voices so familiar they blended into the music of the day. For me, it wasn't just any Saturday. It was my youngest daughter's birthday. At 15, she wasn't the kind of girl who wanted parties with balloons and noisy teenagers. Instead, she had her heart set on something sweeter. An hour at the farmer's market with a budget she could spend however she liked. Her taste was simple, but her eyes always danced at the sight of chocolates, sugared almonds, and homemade fudge wrapped in golden foil. "Don't forget, sweetheart," I reminded her as we parked the car. "You have your budget, and your sister and I will be nearby. But stay where the crowds are. Don't wander off to the far stalls." She nodded eagerly, clutching the envelope of money in her hand as though it were a ticket to Wonderland. Beside me, my eldest, 17, steady and protective, rolled her eyes with the patience of an older sibling. "She'll be fine," she whispered, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "Just let her have fun." I smiled, though a part of me still carried the tight knot of worry that had become second nature since their father's death. The accident had left more than grief in its wake. It had pulled open the old wounds of betrayal, of lies, and of the bitter knowledge that the man I had once loved had left behind children with another woman. Those boys, innocent as they were, had become a storm cloud that hovered over our fractured family. Still, I pushed the thought aside. Today wasn't about the past. Today was about my daughter, about sweets and laughter, about letting her taste freedom. The market was a picture of joy. Stalls bloomed with color, red tomatoes stacked like jewels, golden corn, green cucumbers laid in neat rows. Chickens clucked softly from cages near the butcher's table, and the air smelled of herbs and honey. My youngest darted ahead, already pointing at a table overflowing with candies in glass jars. "Go on," I laughed, watching her hurry forward. "It's your day." An hour passed like a gentle dream. My eldest and I wandered slowly, tasting slices of cheese offered by friendly farmers, pausing to smell lavender soaps. Yet as the minutes ticked by, unease began to prick my chest. I glanced at my phone, half expecting a message. And then it came. The ringtone shattered the hum of the market. My youngest's name flashed on the screen. When I answered, all I heard were her sobs. Mom, she choked out, her voice trembling. "There are... these women. They won't let me go. They're saying things about me, about us." The blood drained from my face. "Where are you?" "By the bakery stand, near the corner. Please come." I didn't wait. Grabbing my eldest's arm, I broke into a run, weaving through startled shoppers. My heart pounded louder than the noise of the crowd. Fear sharpened every step. And then I saw them, 6 women, their hair tied in tight buns, their clothes prim and proper, faces stern with the righteousness of judgment. They circled my youngest like a pack of wolves. She stood in the middle, clutching her little bag of sweets, eyes red from tears. "Young lady," one of them hissed, "your grandparents love you. You should honor them, not shun them." "Shameful," another added. "Your poor little brothers, left without a mother and you, refusing to be their sister. What kind of Christian heart do you have?" My daughter whimpered, shrinking back as their words sliced into her. That was the moment something inside me snapped. "Enough!" My voice cut through their scolding like a whip. I shoved my way into the circle, pulling my daughter against me. She buried her face into my chest, still trembling. My eldest stepped forward without hesitation. "Mom, I'll pay for her things. Just handle this." She took her sister's bag and hurried to the counter, her face pale but determined. I turned on the women, my anger blazing. "How dare you?" My words shook, not from fear, but from fury. How dare you corner a child in public and spew your venom at her?" One of the women raised her chin, eyes cold with disdain. "We are only reminding her of her duty. A good Christian daughter honors her elders. A good Christian wife," her gaze burned into me, "would not deny her husband's parents shelter, nor would she refuse to take in his sons. You are selfish, heartless, and disobedient." I laughed bitterly, though there was no humor in the sound. Disobedient to a man who betrayed his vows, to parents who excuse his sins, and to strangers who think they have the right to terrify my daughters? Spare me your sermons. Voices rose, clashing like thunder in the market. Vendors stared, customers whispered, and soon the argument grew so loud the market organizers intervened, urging us all to leave. But even as I led my daughters away, those women followed, their accusations trailing behind us like a storm cloud. By the time we reached the car, my youngest was shaking, her tears wetting the sleeve of my shirt. My eldest kept glancing back, glaring at the vultures who still lingered at a distance, hungry for another strike. I drove away with my hands tight on the wheel, fury and fear tangled in my chest. I thought the ordeal would end there. I thought the market scene would fade into nothing more than a bitter memory. But I was wrong. It was only the beginning. The house was quiet that evening, but it was the kind of silence that pressed down on the chest like a weight. My youngest hadn't spoken a word since the market. She had curled into herself on the couch, knees drawn to her chest, eyes staring blankly at the flickering television that no one was watching. My eldest sat close, her arm draped around her sister, as though her touch alone could shield her from the cruelty of the world. I sat at the kitchen table, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. The women's voices still rang in my head, selfish, disobedient, heartless. I had heard such accusations before, whispered behind my back, murmured during Sunday services, passed along like gossip wrapped in righteousness. But never, not once, had they been hurled at my daughters. That was the unforgivable line. "Mom," my eldest said softly, breaking the silence. "They won't stop, will they? Even if we avoid them, even if we ignore them, they'll just keep coming." Her voice carried no fear, only exhaustion, the kind that seeps into the bones. I set down the mug, pushing it aside. "No," I admitted, "they won't stop, because they believe they're right. They believe they're saving us, teaching us, correcting us. That kind of arrogance doesn't quit." My youngest stirred then, her voice barely a whisper. "Why do they hate us? What did I do wrong?" The sound of it broke me more than any confrontation in the market. I crossed the room in an instant, kneeling in front of her, taking her tear-streaked face in my hands. "You did nothing wrong," I said firmly. "Do you hear me? Nothing. Their hate is not your burden to carry. They are angry because we chose to live without them, because I chose to protect you from their poison. That's all." She blinked at me, her lower lip trembling. But they said I was cruel to my little brothers, that I don't love them. What if that's true?" Her words twisted in my chest like a knife. She didn't understand, not fully. How could she? She hadn't lived through the betrayal that had burned our family from the inside out. She hadn't seen the way her father's lies had torn through our home, leaving scars that even time refused to heal. "They are not your brothers," I said gently, but with steel in my voice. "They are his children, his secret, his betrayal. You don't owe them your childhood, your peace, or your love. Compassion, maybe. Kindness, when the world allows it, but not sacrifice. Never sacrifice." Her eyes searched mine, and for the first time that day, I saw a flicker of relief. But relief was fleeting. The very next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. A friend had tagged me in a post. When I opened Facebook, my breath caught. There it was, a photo of me at the market, my face contorted in anger, my hand clutching my youngest as if dragging her away. The caption beneath it dripped with venom. A mother who denies her husband's blood. A woman who rejects her Christian duty. Pray for her lost soul. Comments flooded the post, dozens, then hundreds. Some were strangers offering their blind judgment. Shameful. Her poor children. God will punish such selfishness. Others, more chilling, came from people I knew. Neighbors, old acquaintances, even distant relatives who had never once bothered to call after my husband's death. And woven through it all were whispers about the affair, about his other woman, about the boys he left behind. I felt my stomach twist. Someone close enough to know our secrets, had spoken, had dragged our private agony into the public square for all to feast on. I closed my laptop with trembling hands, my reflection staring back at me from the black screen. My heart pounded, not just with anger, but with something darker. Resolve. That was the moment I knew silence would no longer protect us. They had crossed from whispers into war, and I would answer. And the night stretched long and sleepless. Even when I closed my eyes, I could hear the echo of those online voices, hundreds of faceless judges, each pounding the same gavel of condemnation. By morning, my resolve had hardened into something unshakable. If they wanted war, I would give them truth. But truth, as I soon discovered, was more twisted than I had imagined. It began with a knock at my door just after sunrise. My neighbor Daniel, one of the few members of that church I still respected, stood on the porch with an apologetic look etched across his face. "I thought you should see this," he said quietly, handing me his phone. I scrolled through the screen, and my breath caught. There it was, the post that had lit the fire. Not written by some stranger, not even whispered by a jealous friend. Number it was written by her. My ex-mother-in-law. Paragraph after paragraph spun a tale so masterful, it could have been lifted from a soap opera script. According to her, I had turned my back on family, abandoned her and her husband to poverty, and poisoned my daughters against their innocent baby brothers. She painted herself as a frail, heartbroken grandmother, left to starve and weep, a victim of my cruelty. And then came the twist of the knife. She claimed the 2 little boys were born from a surrogate. A surrogate. As though the affair partner who had destroyed my marriage was nothing more than a nameless vessel we had hired to bear children. As though I had coldly rejected those babies simply because they were boys. My vision blurred. Rage throbbed in my temples. "That's a lie," I whispered, my voice trembling. A disgusting, calculated lie. Daniel placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "I know, and many others know too. But you need to understand. This community..." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They hate cheating. It's the one sin they will never forgive. If the truth comes out, it won't just turn against your in-laws, it will consume them." I leaned against the door frame, heart pounding. So this was her game. To hide the infidelity, she had recast the betrayal into a tragic story of motherhood and rejection. She was willing to rewrite history itself, so long as her son's sins never stained her perfect image of family. The thought twisted my stomach. My daughters, still groggy with sleep, came into the living room just as I set Daniel's phone on the table. They looked between us, sensing the heaviness in the air. "What happened now?" my eldest asked warily. I wanted to protect them from it all, to shield them from the toxic theater playing out online. But they deserved to know. They deserved the truth. So I told them, every word, my youngest's hands balled into fists. "She's lying about Dad. About us? How could she? She's desperate, I said quietly. She thinks if she hides the cheating, she can make the church see her as a victim. But lies don't hold forever, not when the truth is staring people in the face. A silence fell over the room, heavy with unspoken fears. Then, slowly, deliberately, my eldest met my eyes. Then we show them, she said. We show them the truth. The conviction in her voice startled me. For so long I had seen her as fragile, struggling under the weight of grief and betrayal. But in that moment, I saw a fire in her I had never seen before. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps silence was no longer enough. The shadows were filled with whispers and lies. It was time to drag everything into the light. The decision sat heavy on my chest all morning, but once it was made, there was no turning back. For months I had kept the files locked away, evidence meant for a divorce trial that would never come. Every message, every photo, every poisoned word was preserved, not out of spite, but out of necessity. A record of betrayal. Proof that I was not the villain my ex and his parents painted me to be. But now, with the lies spreading like wildfire, it was no longer enough to know the truth privately. It had to be shown. By noon, I was standing in the sterile brightness of a print shop, the faint scent of ink and paper filling the air. The man behind the counter didn't ask questions when I slid a flash drive across to him. He simply loaded it, clicked through the files, and raised his brows slightly. "High quality?" he asked. "Highest you've got," I replied. My voice was calm, steady. Inside, my pulse hammered like a war drum. The printer roared to life, spitting out glossy sheets of damning evidence, photographs of my husband wrapped around the woman who had shattered our lives, their faces unmistakable, texts dripping with guilt and desire, emails from my in-laws, words that cut deeper than knives. "Your daughters are bastards. They killed their father. They'll burn for it." I forced myself to look at each page, to relive the betrayal, because it reminded me why I could not falter now. 2 hours later, I carried home a stack of papers thick enough to crush a lie flat. But papers alone weren't enough. Not for this. No, I would give them a story they couldn't ignore. At the dining table, I worked until my fingers ached. I slipped the pages into sleek white binders, arranging them with care. The first image, the one that would greet every curious hand, was of my ex and his mistress tangled together in our living room. Beneath it, I had written in neat, bold letters, the love story of ex-husband's name and affair partner's name. Each binder told the same tale, page after page, their own words indicting them more powerfully than I ever could. It was cruel, perhaps. It was merciless. But it was also the truth. When I finished, I sat back in my chair, staring at the row of binders. They looked harmless, almost innocent, like the hymn books passed out every Sunday. A cruel smile tugged at the corner of my lips. By the next morning, they would be sitting quietly among the stacks at the church entrance, waiting to be picked up by eager hands. And when the congregation opened them, they would see, not my lies, not her sob stories, the truth. Sunday morning arrived cloaked in calm, but my heart thrummed with anticipation. The binders sat neatly stacked in a canvas tote beside me, their glossy covers catching faint rays of dawn. I could almost hear them whispering, "It's time." The church was already humming when I arrived. The air outside smelled of rain-soaked earth and polished wood, of flowers left wilting in the vases by the doors. Inside, voices overlapped in cheerful greetings. Coats rustled, hymnals were lifted from the back desk as though it were any other Sunday. But not this Sunday. I walked quietly, deliberately, each step measured. My daughters were at home, blissfully unaware of the storm about to break. I slipped the binders onto the desk among the usual stack of hymn books. They blended perfectly, innocent wolves among sheep. And then I left. I didn't need to sit in those pews to watch the truth explode. I simply parked across the street in my car, angled so I could see the faces through the tall stained glass windows. It began innocently enough. A few hands reached for the binders, flipping them open mid-song. Confusion creased brows, then shock widened eyes. One woman gasped so loudly I could hear it faintly through the closed car door. The waves spread fast, heads bent over the glossy pages, whispers rippling through the rows like a current of electricity. Some tried to close the binders quickly, as though the images would burn their hands. Others passed them along eagerly, a grotesque fascination pulling them deeper. The pastor's voice faltered. His sermon lost its rhythm. He looked up, bewildered, as his flock buzzed with gossip right before him. By the time the service ended, the air inside the church was thick, not with prayer, not with devotion, but with judgment. The gossip mill churned at lightning speed. Phones lit up as pictures were snapped, messages sent. My ex-husband's name was torn to shreds in whispers and mutters, paired with words I wouldn't dare repeat in front of my children. The mistress became a symbol of sin, a Jezebel in their holy house. And my in-laws, oh, my in-laws, their faces blanched white as the cruel words they had written about my daughters were read aloud, shared, dissected. The very congregation that once pitied them now turned cold, accusing, disgusted. They tried to defend themselves, to sputter excuses, but every binder was a noose tightening around their reputations. Every page screamed louder than their trembling voices. By evening, I heard from a trusted friend that the pastor himself had to step in, not to defend them, but to tame the fury of the gossip. The Facebook group was ablaze, posts so vile they had to be deleted. My daughters' names, once dragged through the mud, were suddenly spoken with pity. 2 letters arrived at our home within days. Apologies written in shaky script, and an invitation to return to the church for support and healing. I didn't care for their church, but I cared that my girls were finally seen for what they were. Victims, not villains. As for my ex-in-laws, they vanished from that congregation entirely, shame clinging to them like a heavy cloak. My ex-mother-in-law's final cry for sympathy appeared only on her personal wall, a lament about how the world had turned cold, how no one cared for the elderly anymore, how her great son would have taken care of her had he lived. I almost laughed when I read it. With what money? The man had nothing, had left nothing but chaos. But now, at least, the chaos was no longer ours to bear alone. It was shared, exposed, reckoned with. The storm had passed, but the echoes lingered. Our house was quieter these days. No more unexpected knocks on the door, no more venomous letters slid under the mat, no more whispered threats carried by church messengers. My daughters could finally breathe. For weeks after the binders exploded through the congregation, the gossip ran its course like wildfire. But as with all fires, the flames eventually died down, leaving only ash and silence. My in-laws disappeared from the church community entirely. Rumor had it they tried attending a neighboring parish, but even there, whispers followed them like shadows. They had built their reputation on lies. Once stripped away, there was nothing left to stand on. My girls began to heal. Therapy became less about defense and more about rediscovery, about reclaiming joy where grief had planted itself. On weekends, they laughed again. voices high and unburdened as they decorated their rooms or planned trips to the market. My youngest even joked about her infamous birthday market showdown, the memory now softened into something we could laugh about together. I often sat by the window at night, watching the quiet street, and thought of my late husband. Once the thought of him brought only rage and sorrow. Now there was something else, clarity. His choices had poisoned our lives, but they no longer held power over us. He was gone, and the mess he left had been cleansed by truth. The truth. That was all it took in the end. Not revenge by fire or fists, but simple, undeniable truth laid bare for all to see. I realized then that strength wasn't just about fighting battles in public. It was about enduring the long, heavy silence after and still choosing to stand tall. One evening, my eldest daughter joined me on the porch. She sat quietly, then whispered, "Mom, do you think people will ever stop talking about us?" I looked at her, really looked at her, the curve of her jaw, the resilience in her eyes, the way grief had shaped her into someone older than her years. "They might never stop talking," I said gently, "but what matters is that we stopped listening." She leaned against me, and together we watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the world in gold and crimson. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The world would keep spinning, gossip would rise and fall, churches would judge and forgive. But within the walls of our little home, a new chapter had begun, one not written in betrayal or bitterness, but in resilience, truth, and love. And that I knew was the only story that truly mattered.